for me to introduce the speaker, I need to tell you that his name is Vincent Thompson, and he is, by the way, the principal design consultant at one of the greatest presentation agencies out there, BrightCarbon. However, I also want to mention that he is, if we have to talk about Google Slides, Vincent will be the person that you need to talk with if we are talking about Google Slides. So you have probably the best person in the world to talk to you about Google Slides right now. The tool is getting more and more popular. Everyone is comparing it to PowerPoint, to Prezi, to many other platforms and software tools. So Vincent, first of all, welcome to the conference.
Thank you so much.
Are you ready to hit the? Are you ready to show some things?
I absolutely am. Thank you. Thank you so much. And for those of you that are eagle-eyed out there, you may well notice that my attire today is actually PowerPoint, which is a little bit contradictory, I guess, with it being a full 45 minutes to talk about Google Slides. But, you know, they're not merchandising Google Slides t-shirts out there at the moment, which is kind of understandable, as it is that new kid on the block. But the one thing that Google Slides does have in terms of the reaction that it garners from most audiences is, well, what are the comparables? How does it stand up against PowerPoint? And in actual fact, for a lot of the basic users, it's very similar. And in the same way that there are some really good tips and efficiency drivers that are available to us within PowerPoint that a lot of us know and use daily, today's session, I'm just going to show you how Google Slides compares, but how it can be used in a really effective manner. So this session is really going to benefit you if you spend lots and lots of time within the program, kind of tearing your hair out. Obviously, I've already gone through that phase with my own hair, and just get quite frustrated thinking, is there a quicker way? Are there other ways that we can do things as we're constructing and building our slides, working with photography, text, and all of the functionality that's needed when you're building a presentation? Now, I encourage everyone to submit questions as we're going through the session. It's very hands-on, so I'm going to be going at speed, but I will take a pause as we get to the end of each tip and exercise and just see if we've had any questions coming through. So don't be afraid. I'm going to escape out of the show mode and we're going to dive straight on in, as we don't have that long together to get through as much good stuff as possible. So I guess one of the quickest ways of driving efficiency within any presentation software, or any software on a laptop or a PC, for instance, is the use of the quick keys. And Google Slides is no different. There are all kinds of functions and functionality that can be driven just using some of the keyboard. Now, the first tip, and of course we'll send this as a little bit of a cheat sheet for anyone that wants it after the session as well, but the first thing I would say is your working space. If you're developing and designing content within Google Slides, you want to make the most of the space that's on your screen. And a really good way of doing that is simply by pressing F11. As long as you're using a Google Chrome browser, watch what happens. Click. And there you go. It now just gets rid of all of my toolbar at the bottom of the screen. It gets rid of the tabs at the top of my screen. So it allows me to focus predominantly on the Google Slides workspace. If I press F11 again, you'll see it just comes out of that mode. And now I can see all of my other desktop areas. So I'm going to keep it in F11 mode, just so that then it focuses your attention as well on what I'm doing on the screens. Now, about creating content. So this is where the Shift key comes in. And the Shift key, the same in PowerPoint, but in Google Slides, should be everyone's best friend. When you hold down the Shift key, if you're drawing a shape, for instance, click down that Shift key, and it means that rather than drawing a rectangle that isn't a perfect square, you're going to have a perfect square shape. Or perhaps more helpful, if you're perhaps drawing circles on a slide, maybe to place a logo in the background of, or just for certain points that you're placing on your screen. Again, there's every chance that you'll accidentally create an oval, and you may not notice that until you're in show mode. If you hold down the Shift key when you're drawing something like a circle, then it just again means that the proportions are locked down and you're always going to have a perfectly spherical shape as you're holding down that Shift key and drawing a circle. Now, what about wonky lines? This is a syndrome that we find many of our clients are infected with, where the lines that they have on the screen are never quite the real deal. They're just slightly misaligned as they've drawn them. So when you've got the line at the top of this circle here, if we move it over here, you'll see how it just increases, it goes up slightly, and it can be a real pain for people. Well, again, if we hold down the shift key, if we're trying to draw a line, so we go insert, we've got all of our shapes here at the top, line, hold down that shift key, and all of a sudden, when I try and draw a line, it now means that that line is either perfectly horizontal, 45 degrees, or 30 degrees, or vertical. So it just locks down those parameters. So there's no real risk of having that wonky line on a slide. So you can use that to build a graph or a table or whatever kind of diagram might be helpful to you when you're working within Google Slides itself. So the shift key strikes again. And then once you actually have some content on your slides, the shift key is really handy for moving things around as well. So if I want to move this rectangle across this x-axis, then there's every chance that, again, by mistake, I'll nudge it up slightly or I'll nudge it down. Whereas if I hold down the shift key, when I move it, you'll see that it doesn't allow me, if I move my mouse up and down, it doesn't allow me to actually move on that vertical axis. So it keeps me nice and straight and narrow. So that can be a really handy way of working through. Now, what about copying content? So if we want to, let's say perhaps we have this logo slide where we're trying to show some of the clients that we work with, and what we'd like to do is maybe put a white circle behind all of these logos, because at the moment they're just kind of sat on the slide without any real rationale. Well, traditionally, I guess you could do right-click copy and right-click paste, and that's certainly going to paste it on, and then you can move it over, or perhaps even Control-C, Control-V as a quick key. Yep. But did you know if you hold down the Control key and click and drag on an object, wherever you let go of that object, you see it creates a secondary? So I can create multiple objects and land them wherever I'd like. So it's just a quite quick hack. And of course, you can combine the Shift and Control key together. So I can make a second one there, a third one there, and you can do it with multiple. Holding down Shift, you can select multiple objects like so. And then if I hold down Control and Shift and just nudge these ones down here as well, perfect. So now I've got all of my circles, I can just send them to the back, and now all of these logos sit on this slide in a much nicer environment. Maybe the little shift of the logos themselves, but a really quick way at creating multiple shapes on a slide. Now, there's one other trick that Google Slides has up its sleeve with regard to generating repeat elements on a slide. And that's the repeat function. So if I wanted to create an org chart, for example, what I can do is hold down the Shift and Control key as I create this second person down on the org chart. And then there's a repeat function, and that's Control Y. So watch what happens. If I click Control and then Y, there we go. It's just created exactly that same function again. If I do Control Y again, and again, and again, and again, and again, there you go. So you can use this combination of Shift and Control Y to really quickly build these more complex slides. You can hold down Shift to draw lines, for instance, and before you know it, you're able to construct a presentation a slide that just has a little bit more going on. I'm just holding down Control and Shift again. Straight line, of course, so a combination of all of the techniques that we've just been learning just to draw this other one. And there you go. So we can build these fairly complex diagrams just within slides themselves. Just on that note, if I just create another slide with regard to diagrams, Google Slides has its own kind of version of Smart Art, if anyone's familiar with that in PowerPoint. If we go into Insert, you can click on Diagram, and Google Slides brings up this window here that has lots of predefined diagrams. So grid, hierarchy, timeline, process, relationship, or cycle. And while they might not sit in with your brand, they're a really good way to get a bit of a head start within the slides. So here's a timeline, for instance. So we've got, well, lots of different timelines. But if I click on this one, it places it on the slide like so. You can actually, if I just go back a step, decide how many points. Now, again, it's a little bit basic. You've only got the option of 4, 5, or 6 points across a timeline. If this layout was just nice and blank, let's just click, and there you go. You see how it places it onto the slide with 4 dates? If I change that to 6 dates, click, it places it on with 6 dates. And the nice thing about this is that it's fully editable. So I can go in and change the colors, for instance, of each of these points on the timeline to bring it back into your own brand. But it's certainly a lot quicker than having to design each of these as separate elements. The text can be selected, added to, replaced, all of that type of thing. So it's a really good way of just playing around with your timings, with your different diagrams if needed on slides. Okay, into a little bit of detail. In fact, let me just pause there and see. Boris, has there been any questions coming through?
Okay, there are questions actually. So let's go very quickly through some of them because I think there are very quick responses and you'll be able to very quickly answer. Can I create a customizable shortcut toolbar?
So the quick access toolbar that is prevalent in PowerPoint and so helpful, unfortunately, just isn't available within Google Slides. And I believe that that's because, you know, Google Slides lives within a Chrome browser. So when you're actually accessing and going into that level of detail, it's universal across everyone that's using Google Slides. So I'm afraid there is no way of being able to bring out some of the ribbon and some of this functionality. In the same way as in PowerPoint, you'd have this additional ribbon down here or add to the bits. Unfortunately, you can't. So sorry about that.
Yeah, one more that is an interesting one. So whether or not do you know when Google will announce a feature for increasing the kerning between the letters? Do you know something like that's coming up?
I have no idea. I mean, they are somewhat reluctant to develop or release many things in terms of the system. With regard to the lettering, there's no way, unfortunately, of getting into that level of detail with the font. So yeah, the format options is somewhat restrictive. You've got your text fitting, of course, from a text box perspective and size and rotation and things, but you can't change the kerning of the letters themselves as they sit. And of course, you're also somewhat limited by the font types available within here as well.
Yeah. One last, and let's move on. There is a question in regards to whether or not you are able or how should someone do it, how to copy paste an image with a transparent background that they found, let's say, on the web and copy paste it into the Google Slides still with a transparent background.
Oh, well, in actual fact, that's a pretty easy one. I'm in Google Chrome here, and let's just find a logo with a transparent image. So what's a good one? What about a PowerPoint logo, just to rub it in their face? So let's find an image, and in the search you would go into Tools, Color, Transparent. So now we know that these are kind of PNGs with a transparent backdrop. So if I click on this PowerPoint one, actually this one doesn't look like it's, here we go. So this has got a transparent background, right? In fact, the easiest way to do it is just click and drag over your Google Slides tab, let go, and it will create that image with the transparency. You see all of that white space, or if I move to the tab, all of that kind of checkered transparency is actually pulled over. So that's a really good way of just keeping transparencies. Once they're available within the Google search, click and drag them straight on into your slide deck. And if they were transparent, they should stay transparent.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, there are more questions, but let's move on for now.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so on to a little bit more with regard to text and using quick keys. So this is a challenge that a client brought up for us a few weeks ago, actually, and it was to say they quite often use quotes from other companies to talk about kind of their service and what they've been able to provide. But one of the challenges that they always have is when they find another quote. So let's just find another quote here. So here we go. Works of art make rules. Let's just copy this. And if I copy this text from online or from a Word document or wherever, if we've got this really nice looking text that fits nicely on the slide, if I select over this text and Control V paste it in, you'll see that it ruins all of that nice text and the style and the way that it's been predefined. Now, there is a way to force the text that you're placing on the slide to stay consistent with the way that the text already sits. And the way to do that is actually to hold down Shift and Control when you paste. So if you hold down Shift and Control, and so Shift Control V, watch what happens. There we go. It's put the new text in exactly the same style, size, and font type that was in the existing text box. Now, of course, that Claude Debussy was the actual who it was by. So let's just cut that out, select over the John Lennon, whoops, over the John Lennon part. And again, Control Shift and V, paste it in the same style. And then I can just get rid of these bits. So a quick way of using Shift, again, our best friend, Shift and Control V to paste that on in. One other final piece on quick keys is the ability to move things forwards and backwards. You know, it can be really infuriating having to right click and say order, bring forwards, and then you have to right click again. If it's still behind some of the others, right click, bring forwards. Well, you can actually just hold down Control and use your arrow keys. Each time I press an arrow key, it can move the object up or back. If I do Control and Shift again, Control and Shift, up arrow, brings it to the very front. So we've got this one at the front, Control and Shift, this one even closer to the front, this one behind, these all working, Control and Shift to the back, to arrow down, back, great. So we've now got all of these magazines in their natural order, and as they just overlap each other, they're in the right order as well. Now, you'll see that these aren't quite aligned. From an alignment perspective, Google Slides is really easy. You can select over all of your magazines, right click, and we're just going to align vertically. Bottom click, there you go. They're all now perfectly aligned at the bottom. So alignment can work really easily within Google Slides. The same for distribution. So on here, we've got this timeline. All of these circles are slightly out of alignment. So I can just right click and I'm going to again align to bottom. So they're nice and straight, but also they need an equal gap between them. There's 4 years apart. So if I just right click again, distribute horizontally, click, there we go. So they're now equally spaced as well on the slide. Now, what about object styles? So there's nothing more infuriating than a colleague or another client sending across a deck where all of a sudden a lot of the content that sits on the slide isn't consistent with your own style, your own brand, etc. So there are ways that we can actually pick up the style on certain elements and push them onto others. And that's done if I select the element that we like the look of. Up here in this top ribbon, it's called Paint Format. And if I just click once, you'll see that my mouse cursor now changes to an arrow with a little paint roller sign. And if I just click on another item, like this inconsistent box, click, there you go, it's now pushed not only the style of the object, but also the size and style of the font within that boxed area. And that doesn't just apply to the same size and shapes. If I pick up again and paste onto this ugly circle, it will get rid of this fairly horrid reflection and this shadow, and of course the Comic Sans text. So if I click, there we go. So that's really good from a single pick up and paste onto another object, the style. But what about doing it across a deck? Well, all that we need to do is click on the style that we like, and if we double click the paint format tool, then what happens now is once I click on a single object, the tool stays in action. So I can still go onto this ugly circle, click, and I can just go through an entire deck, clicking on anywhere that I find these types of shapes, and it will apply that same style to it. So it's a really quick way of just getting on through and building that consistency into your own slides. The other thing that I should say with regard to the kind of pushing the format of the styles is that it doesn't just have to be the object and the text inside it. You can actually do it with just the text. So if I select part of this text, just here for instance, and pick up style, what I can then do is select just the text, let go, and you'll see it will actually change the text formatting, but not the object that it sits in. Unfortunately, you can't do vice versa. You can't change the object but leave the text as is inside it. But still, a really helpful technique for going through and highlighting text maybe. Perhaps if you've got something like a bold and a slightly different color that you're trying to highlight your word with, if you pick up that, then you can go in and do the same on other parts of text. So really helpful if you're working on more document styles. Just staying with text for a moment, find and replace, a really handy tool, handy technique. Control H is a shortcut that brings up this find and replace box. And of course, what it allows you to do is type in a word and go through the whole of the presentation and replace it with another. So maybe it's for a deck for a different prospect. So that's really cool, really helpful. A lot of you may already know about that functionality. Something that a colleague shared with me a few weeks ago, though, is something else where it's really frustrating if you've got really text-heavy presentations and sometimes there are double spaces in the text. So someone's spacebarred twice. It's just it just happens, I guess, at times when you've got copywriters or lots of text that's been placed in, especially if you're building a Google Slides as more of a document rather than a presentation. Well, what you can do within this find and replace is spacebar, and then replace with a single spacebar, replace, and it will actually go through and find, let's replace all, it will replace all of those double spaces with single spaces. So it's a super quick way to go through and just check and bring your text back in. There we go. It's gone through the whole deck and replaced all of those double spaces. So quite a handy technique and tip there. Another point with text is, well, at the moment we've got these bullet points within the text box, but everything's a little bit tight. And I know that someone mentioned the kerning between the words or the letters themselves, but it's equally frustrating when there's not a gap between your enter points. And traditionally people put an enter point in here, maybe an enter point in here. They recognize that it's a little bit too big, so then they make it smaller. Anyone guilty of this? Oh, wow, people should go to prison for doing this. And then they put some text in, and it goes smaller. There is another way. We don't need to put fake enter points between our text, okay? And the way that we can go about doing this is by selecting the text box itself. And up here in the ribbon, you'll see that there's a line spacing. And one of the options within here is add space before or after paragraph. So I'm just going to select after paragraph and see what happens. Click. There we go. It's added a nice space, and that space will stay true. If we're ever adding another bullet point, for instance, within here, it will allow us to have that same gap in between. If you wanted more control, you can get more finite by just clicking on custom spacing, click, and there you can change exactly how much space. So we could go maybe 14 point, apply a little bit more space within there. Okay, so can I hand over to you again, Boris, as they had any other questions coming through?
So there are some questions again. Obviously, it's taking 2 or 3 seconds until we unmute ourselves here. So when using icons, is it possible to import an SVG file so that you can color the icon once you're in Google Slides?
Yeah, that's a great shout. There's no easy way to bring across any vector-based graphics.
Okay.
There are a couple of tools that we can share with you, perhaps after this session, in fact, where you can import within your drive an EMF, and from that file, you can actually then use a drawing tool to then import it into your drive as an editable vector and pull it through. But unfortunately, at the moment, you can't just pull in an SVW and change it. There are quite a few add-ons out there. So Noun Project is a classic. Insert icons for slides as well that you can search for. You can set up a free account and find icons and actually decide what color you'd like them to be before you import them onto the slide itself. So you can find, there's a plane here, for instance. You can change your values of it, change your colors, add new colors. If you've got your RGB values, then that can obviously work as well. So let's go with this blue, for instance, and insert icon. It just takes a second to think its way through, and then it places it up here. It isn't, unfortunately, then editable once it's on the slide, but you can have that control pre-placing it onto the deck itself.
Got it. So there are some workarounds that people can utilize.
You know, and it seems a little bit ironic, but the other workaround that I would also suggest is if you have got PowerPoint, and a client is wanting you to build the deck within Google Slides, you could always build and put your vectors on the PowerPoint slide deck. If you upload, so you know you can file, upload, import the slides from PowerPoint, actually then the vectors do stay true. So if you've got SVGs in PowerPoint, save that PowerPoint slide deck, import it into your Google Slides, you can then actually edit all of the iconography or any vector that you've placed into that deck.
Got it. One last. What you showed about the transparency and dragging and dropping from Google is brilliant. There is one addition to that question, because people notice that when the picture, when the logo, let's say, is on a transparent background in a PowerPoint presentation and you try to copy paste it from there to a Google slide deck, then it goes into white backgrounds. Anything there? Any workarounds?
Yeah, the advice there is when you're in PowerPoint, the workaround is, let's just let it fire up. So when you've got an icon that's in PowerPoint, what you've got to imagine is that you may have made that transparent area in the background. Of course, if you take that and pull it across, it is just going to keep its it's going to replace all of this with white space. The technique and tip is, as long as it's transparent in PowerPoint, right click and make sure you save it. So you're going to save as a picture. As long as you save it as a PNG and save it maybe onto, let's just save it onto desktop as blue circle. And now if I can find it on my desktop, which would be highly embarrassing, there we go. Let's just pull it over. And because it's now a PNG, it comes across with its transparency. So you just need to make sure that you don't pull it across from PowerPoint, but right click and save that, whatever you've done to it to make that background transparent, save it as a PNG, and then pull that PNG file directly into your Google Slides deck. Okay?
Got it. Yeah, that's a nice workaround again. So let's move on now.
Perfect. And as if perfectly planned, we're now actually going to talk a little bit around images and imagery and what we can do with pictures. So, I mean, there are so many different picture tools out there. Unsplash is easily our favorite when it comes to just free, royalty-free images. And you can, again, when you're working in something like Unsplash, the technique for bringing images into a slide. So let's just type in architecture. So lovely pictures, lovely, lovely, lovely. That might sit nicely against a backdrop. Here we go, download for free. Well, again, in Chrome, we can see that our downloads just position themselves here. And again, it just makes productivity so easy that we can drag that image, drop it straight onto our slides. So if I just create a new slide, really quick and easy ways. When we're working with larger images, sometimes it's quite restrictive being this far zoomed in. And I guess when we're talking about zooming in on our area in Google Slides, we can use this function here, so zoom, and that will allow you to zoom in. If you hold down Control, zoom out. So that's quite handy. Or we can drop down and click Fit. It just fits it onto the screen. In terms of the quick keys for zooming, Control, Alt, and plus and minus. So Control, Alt, plus allows me to zoom in. Control, Alt, minus, zoom out. When I'm zoomed out, it just gives me a bit more control. I can see my slide boundaries. I can increase the size of that shape just to sit on that backdrop the way that I would like it to, and then maybe start building with content. Now, in terms of editability of images within slides, it's pretty advanced. You know, we've got our cute little kitten here, our dog here, our rabbit here. Smart guides kind of kick in that allow us to align things up really neatly. Double click and the guides again work really well with cropping. So if I bring this down, get it to that point and you can see these blue lines that show that this image is the same as this one. Again, crop it, there we go. Now I know for sure all three of these images are exactly the same size. So that's pretty handy, pretty cool. So cropping things down work really well. Here we're going to crop this image that's portrait into a TV screen, crop down like so. And then we can, again, just move around the image in the crop. So I can choose which part of this beautiful sunset, perhaps we want to keep the landscape in the backdrop, sits within the crop. And then I just click to get away from that. And there we go. So very similar to PowerPoint, equally effective, different ways that we can crop things down. And in a similar way, rather than just moving the image around in a cropped area, and by the way, I can turn on the crop by just double clicking on the picture. Rather than just moving this image around, you can actually increase the size of the image in the crop as well. So as I now move this down, you can see that we're more honed in on the user and this lady's hands in the same way as the other devices. Click away. There we go. So it's a nice way of being able to zoom in. One other thing that we can do with images is, obviously it's not going to fit very well within this watch space as a rectangle. What we can do is go up to the crop option, click on down, and if I go into shapes, circle, you'll see that now we are working within a circle space. And sometimes it's really handy to overcrop. You see, then I can see the image behind it. So now it just gives me a little bit more control over what I'm trying to get to within that space. And then select which part of the map you want to be seen on that smartwatch, click away. There we go. So your images can fit within specific shapes as well. And of course, just going on to that, it can fit into any of the predefined basic shapes in Google Slides. Okay. And that's not only handy for enforcing or fitting an image into another part of a picture or part of a slide, you can also highlight particular areas of images. So here, if I copy and paste, so I've got two versions of the image, maybe zoom out a little bit. If I click on this one in the background and go to Format Options, I can change and recolor the image. I can make it black and white, for instance, and I can perhaps make it a little bit transparent. Click on Adjustments, make an image a bit transparent like that. And then if I just take this top one, just put it back over the top, and then crop it down, maybe to this chap here who's on his laptop, just put it into that space. We've now effectively highlighted part of the image, right? Also, it could be in a circle, so we can force him into this circular area. And let's just give it a little bit of an outline just to make it very obvious that this is the highlight. We're going to show mode. So you can highlight parts of images just through using these different techniques, manipulating the way that the image looks in the backdrop and then mirroring and having the other one perfectly aligned on top of it. Maybe you've got some text then that's going into the detail about individuals and the way that they're looking and working. So any questions on images?
We don't see questions on images. There is one question that we may want to answer now, but I think it will be better for us to keep it till the end, which is, get ready to answer that one though, which is going to be, what is Google Slides having that PowerPoint doesn't, and vice versa, more or less.
Oh, okay. That's
but let's keep it till the end, I think.
Okay, exactly. That's a good one. I'll try and think as I go through. Okay, so we've got around 10 minutes left. I'm just going to keep on firing through. Grids and layouts. So again, one way of building consistency into your slides that's super helpful within Google Slides, and the same with PowerPoint, is using guidelines. And if we just right click and go to guides, click on show guides, you'll see that it puts one on the vertical center point and the horizontal center point. And we can manipulate them, we can move them around. And if I click on other slides now, you'll see how they stay throughout the whole of that presentation. So if you have perhaps an area of your slide that you have dedicated to title text, for instance, then that's great. You can imagine that maybe you have a logo down at a certain part of the slide as well, or footnotes. Well, that's great. We can use guides to give you some proportions. Now, it's tricky with just having two, right? Because we need a few more. Right click, and we can just go into guides and we can add another vertical guide. Move this one on over so that it's similar. Right click again, guides. Let's add another horizontal guide. And this, it looks so simple, but it makes all of your slides, if you imagine they're all against this type of background, it gives you a key line. It gives you something to say, well, on this slide, I've got these points that I'm going to bring up. So I'm going to have, this space for a text box here, which is going to be text fit, and then another one here, and then there'll be another text box here. Great, great, great. Maybe they're a little bit big, but now you use these guidelines to help guide the way that they sit. Let's just distribute them horizontally. That red's a little bit garish for now, but you can imagine that the text would go in there. But then when you move into a next slide, and it does just magnetize itself onto these, we can start with that same version, but this time we can say, well, we've got this kind of punchline down here, but having that consistency just because of the guidelines means that when you're in present view, click, of course the guidelines aren't there anymore, but your content stays consistent. Things aren't jumping. There's always some kind of anchorage to the elements that you've got on the slide. So guidelines are a really important factor of building into either your template or just the deck that you're working on to try and establish some form of consistency or hierarchy between the layouts and the way that you build them. So that's it on guidelines. Oh, the only thing that I would add to that is that there is, of course, the danger that if you build the guidelines within the slide itself, you can still move them. If you're going to build this as a template that you want others in the organization to use, the tip would be to go into View, Master, and build your guidelines on that slide master. So you can see that if I've added a vertical guide, it's now a different color. And that's because it's sitting in the master. So if I put, let's just put this one in the middle. What I can now do is come out of this master view, click, and you'll see that that yellow guideline's there. The other ones can be moved, but because this one was built on the master, it can't actually be moved now. Items still kind of magnetized to it, so it's still really helpful. But this is certainly certainly a healthy technique for if you're building a template for others, building the actual guidelines from within the master. Okay. So we've spoken quite a lot about kind of inserting things, manipulating and formatting things. What about actually giving a presentation within Google Slides? There are some functions that are super helpful within Google Slides if you're in an environment like today, for instance, but giving a presentation over a WebEx, a webinar, a Zoom, Teams, and all these different things. And in fact, if I just go into presenter view, one really helpful thing is to actually place closed captions on. So you can see my screen here. If you go down to the bottom left, you can go into this bottom area and you can go into captions preferences. And if I toggle captions, then now what happens is that I have subtitles. I have captions as I'm reading out. So if you're at a large conference space or if you're giving a presentation where some people are just not going to be able to hear you, maybe they're doing it amongst other things, then it's a really nice idea to be able to have your verbiage, have your actual speech put into play in subtitles. And it does a pretty good job. I mean, there's the odd word that it's missed out as I've been talking through. Maybe that's my English Northern accent, who knows? The other really nice thing about this is that there's no record of what's being said. So all of the text that you're seeing on the screen, as soon as I come out of show mode, it now disappears. So it is just for that live environment to have those speaker notes and subtitles on as I'm going through. Now, if you'd perhaps like it to record your own speaker notes, your own voice, at times it can be really laborious, right? Having to type out your speaker notes. If you would just like to present yourself, what you can do, and then actually have your speaker notes written for you, go into Tools, and you can voice type speaker notes. So if I click here and click to speak, well, now I can say what I want to say on this slide, and you can see that it's just adding that text into my speaker notes. So again, it's a really quick way if you're not wanting to type away what you think you're going to say, or you prefer to say it more naturally and then go in and edit the script, then again, this is a really good way of shortcutting that exercise. And then when I click on this icon, we now have all of your speaker notes ready to go for that slide when you're in presenter view. Cool, eh? Okay, one other thing when it comes to presenting in slides. Slides is wonderful in many, many ways, but the challenge I think a lot of people face is, well, how do I share it with a client? Do I just, and it's the same with PowerPoint, I guess. You send it over to a client or you share it with a client with maybe a view only restriction. And the challenge is that that client only ever opens it up in this kind of editable view mode. Even if they can only view the deck, they still see all of the thumbnails on the left-hand side and all of the speaker notes down here. So it feels as though they're just in this edit mode. Whereas it might be that you want them to see it as a presentation. You want them to click through it as a presentation. There is an awesome, awesome hack for this. And all that you need to do is, I'm just going to copy and paste this one. Well, actually, no, I can do it within this. You need to go into your top text area. And up in your URL, you'll see that you have edit written in here. If I change edit to present, enter, Let's see what happens. You see that the whole of your Google Slides deck now will only ever be in this full screen view. So you can click and navigate it through. It'll have all the animations. So if you send this on as a link for people to see, then they're going to have it in the way that it was intended. Just a word of warning, make sure that people are able to just have access as a view only if you don't want them to almost rewire it, because of course all you need to do to go back into normal edit view is to go edit, and you're back in normal edit view. Not that anyone would actually realize that that's how to do it. So when you're sending on the link to others, if you've given them shared access, just change that edit to present, and then whenever they open up that the Google Slides presentation, it will be in full screen view. So I think that's a good one to end on. And now just to take some of those final questions.
You should be. All right. So the first one, I think it's a very quick one. Is BrightSlide your add-on for PowerPoint? By the way, for those of you who are using PowerPoint and don't know about that add-on, the BrightSlides add-on, please Google it, please. However, is it compatible with Google Slides?
I'm afraid not. Again, it's one of those things that VBA has been used to actually create BrightSlide as an add-on, and it just works within that PowerPoint environment, unfortunately. I think that it's the same as those other restrictions that we spoke about earlier, where there's no real way of manipulating the functionality and the ribbon within Google Slides. There are add-ons that you can get to enhance certain things, but they're all still a little bit temperamental, so unfortunately not.
All right, and there is one more from Paul. Paul, by the way, this is his third question. Obviously, he's a heavy Google Slides user. So Paul is asking, when designing multiple charts, can you duplicate charts and then reformat them, or you should always start from the beginning with each and every chart?
I would start from the beginning with every chart. And for the rationale behind that being that when you insert or create a chart, the way that chart, let's build in a bar chart. So you've got a bar chart here. It's a good question, actually. It's something that I've not really thought about. But if we duplicate it, I believe that both of these will be linked to that same source. Let's just test it, should we? So we've got it here. If I just put 100 here, and go back into Google Slides, there's that 100. You see how it's adapted it to that on the second one as well. So the risk would be, oh, let's update, sorry, and update. Yeah, so if you duplicate the chart, you're only ever going to have the same data from the open source link. So you don't want to be duplicating the charts themselves, because the data will just manipulate on all of them. The advice is you would insert a new chart, and therefore it'd be pointing to a new Google Sheet each time. Okay.
Got it. And let's end with your few thoughts. We have 2 minutes. Let's end with your thoughts on the question that you should be now ready to answer to. Like, what are the things that Google Slides has that PowerPoint doesn't, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think that it's safe to say that PowerPoint is still the king when it comes to the sheer gamut, the amount and range of functionality that's available within it. I think that, as soon as you start to toy with or try and get behind animation, which as a company, BrightCarbon believe is, absolutely paramount to a presentation, Google Slides is still very clunky in that area. It doesn't have the bells and whistles, the ability to really control and manipulate your animation pane in the same way as PowerPoint. So that is a big area that's lacking in our own mindset. So I think that's probably one of the negatives, or one of the areas that is the biggest void between them. But I'd say on the flip side of that, from what's better about Google Slides, I have to say it has to be collaboration. I think that whilst Microsoft and Office 365 and PowerPoint are really catching up with the ability to use SharePoint and have a few people within the same slide deck, within maybe even the web PowerPoint version, Google Slides is so good with its real-time collaboration. We've often had maybe 10, 11, 12 colleagues within the same deck running through a presentation to help get it out of the park by the end of the day. And that ability to see exactly what others are working on either the slides around you or sometimes the same slide, and be able to have live comments just by right-clicking and adding a comment and adding someone in with comments, productivity goes through the roof, from a design level within our own organization, but also collaborating with clients and them being in there saying, oh, can we do this? Can we change this? So it used to be that you'd have to send the deck along, you'd wait a couple of days for feedback, but you can actually work in that real-time zone. And I don't think that there's anything better than Google Slides out there of being able to do that with the responsiveness and that immediate feedback that it gives.
Yeah, cannot agree with you more on the collaboration part. It's still that Google seems like mastered that technology in a way that it's very hard to catch, you know, like it's very, very hard for some other companies to do it, but who knows? Let's see what the future shows. Vincent, thank you so much for this demo intensive, I would call it, session. Thank you so much for being part of the event.
Thank you so much.